Welcome to another Psychonaut Sessions, your home for all things psycho. This is your host, Daniel Muller, and we're continuing our Halloween month with Dracula, Vlad the Impaler from TOPPS Comics. I've always been a huge Dracula fan. I would say Dracula is probably my favorite monster of all time. Really interesting time during the 90s when Francis Ford Coppola's Bram Stoker's Dracula came out. There was Dracula mania everywhere. There was a huge vampire mania in the 90s anyway, due to Vampire the Masquerade, role-playing game, Interview with a Vampire. The movie came out, and Rice's books were huge at that time. Just vampires were the thing. Unfortunately, I think in the 2000s, the Twilight series has kind of killed the coolness of vampires. But they were badass. And Dracula is the king of the roost. I love it. So TOPPS Comics put out a series of comics in the 90s. They went into the comics game. They originally, TOPPS, of course, was a trading card company, mostly sports cards. In fact, TOPPS sports cards, baseball cards were some of my favorite, other than Fleer. And got into the comics game because it was, the boom in the 90s. Everybody was trying to get into the comics game. There was a lot of money to be had. And so they mostly focused on IPs. Let's see, they did Jurassic Park, Cadillacs and Dinosaurs. They really only lasted for a short time. They did do a series of Kirbyverse books. So Jack Kirby's, one of Jack Kirby's kind of like last forays into the comic industry. Some of his stuff like Night Glider, I think Satan 6, some others. I think we'll see an ad for that. But Dracula was big, so they did do a rendition of Bram Stoker's Dracula, the movie, which was beautifully drawn by Mike Mignola, which is one of the most beautiful comics ever drawn. Fortunately, I don't have it anymore. I had a unfortunate comics purge way back in the day that I didn't really have a whole lot of control over. Won't get into that, but it's a sad story, and I lost that book. But I did just recently find another book that I lost, and a comics bin of Vlad the Impaler, which is the true story of Vlad, which the Dracula story is based upon, the historical figure. What's cool about these comics is that they came with a series of trading cards. And so this was a 3-issue miniseries, and the first issue came with cards by Esteban Maroto, Sam Keith. It's kind of fun, and then another Mike Mignola piece. So beautiful cards, and when you turn them over, you get one of those kind of, each one is a puzzle piece of a greater image, and we got a little Jack Kirby action going there of what looks like a more traditional Dracula. I would love to get all of these and maybe put them together as something to hang up, just to have like a Kirby Dracula, but tons of fun. Love it. Love it, love it, love it. I even loved the classical rendition of Dracula. I'm not, tied to any one particular rendition at all. But, I would have to say also, Gary Oldman as Dracula. It's really hard to top that, ladies and gentlemen. All right. Anyway, so this is the true story written by Roy Thomas. Roy Thomas should not need any introduction to anybody involved in comics. Prolific comic writer, had his hands in so many wonderful things. Kind of a legend of the industry. Not just in the mainstream, but did kind of a lot of offshoot things. Wrote a lot of Elric stuff as well for First Comics. And Esteban Maroto is a Spanish comic artist. Wonderful. I kind of wished the rest of the comic, when I remember first getting this, that it looked like this. I love this kind of rendering that happens with shading, where it's not filled in, it's just all blank, and then with coloring it just has this like monochromatic feel. I love that. this TOPPS logo really bothers me. It's just it's like, oh, you're getting some kind of sports flyer. That's the way every time I see the TOPPS Comics logo, that's what I think, and how it feels. But without it, I mean, it's just such a beautiful cover, beautiful book. The colors are great, just so dynamic and eye catching. I remember seeing this on the stands, in the comic stands, when I was young. I had no idea it was coming out and blew my mind. Picked it up right away. Never even looked at issue 2 or 3. I need to pick them up at some point. So here we go. Roy Thomas, Esteban Maroto, and let's just kind of dive in. So what's cool about this is that it's not just a historical biography. It's posing Dracula as the Dracula monster, and we get this really cool splash page here with these like demons and Castle Dracula. It looks like fairly accurate rendition of the actual castle that the Dracula mythos is based upon. So somebody did their research pre-internet era, but we get Dracula coming in as a mist and basically introducing the book, much like the Crypt Keeper would, which is kind of fun. So love it. Again, beautifully rendered. Even though I was hoping the comic was going to be more drawn in this style, it's still beautiful, wonderfully detailed, and the colors are not bad as well. Obviously, they're still doing traditional color separation here, even though this was the time when computer coloring was really starting to get its kick in the comic industry. This is still just traditional coloring palette, but done really well. I think the colors work great, and we get the origin of Vlad Dracul. So basically, he was the second son, I believe, of Vlad. So he's actually Vlad the Second, really, or Vlad Dracul, son of the dragon. And so we see here his father, his older brother Mercia, who's jealous of him because he evidently favors his son Vlad, and he's a member of the Order of the Dragon. So even when he was very young, actually he's Vlad the Third. I didn't mean to call him Vlad the Second. Vlad the Second is actually his cousin, and he is actually Vlad the Third. But even at a young age, he's promising his son his cloaks of the Order of the Dragon, which was a Christian order at the time of psychopaths, really? I don't know for sure. I need to do a little bit more research on that. And a medallion and sword that was promised to him. And it shows him a little bit, even as a young age, watching the hanging of some usurpers of the throne. His mother doesn't like that, but of course he's fascinated by it. His father and his brother return from a battle with the Turks. So this is in the kingdom of Wallachia, which is like the more southern region of Romania. And at this time, it was, there was many battles going on with the Ottoman Empire. So we get to see an episode where his father brutally just beheads someone on the street for just even muttering some sort of doubt towards the king. And Vlad himself's just sitting there in the blood, and just kind of these impressions being left upon him. So you get this idea that he's, obviously being raised in a very brutal environment with a father that has absolutely no patience and no grace and no mercy to anybody who second guesses him. You do get to see a little bit of his older brother having this sort of, jealousy towards him. But that doesn't really end up being that important. Even though except for the fact that his older brother gets left behind on an excursion that they're taking into an area of Turkey. I'm horrible with pronunciations, but in Gallipoli, which is a Turk-ruled area on the Greek peninsula. So Vlad takes his two youngest sons, which is the Vlad that we know, and then his younger brother on this particular excursion, leaving the older one behind. And that is kind of important later in the story a little bit. So they go to this excursion. They get into a fight and a battle. The Sultan in charge of the area, which they were, they were supposed to be working out some sort of a deal, takes him hostage, the king and his two sons, and basically decides, you know what, I'm going to take your sons and I'm going to raise them. I'll let the rest of your army go, but I'm keeping you hostage and in prison, and I am keeping your two sons and I'm raising them as my own. So this was frequently done back in the day, all the time, just exchanging, hostages in terms of royalty, and then one king raising the sons of another as a way to keep a truce happening between the two countries. So very common. So we get to see how Vlad and his younger brother were raised with the Sultan and the Sultan's son. They actually were all fairly close together, and began to just kind of be raised as three brothers, really. What happens though, one day, whenever he's a little bit older, the Sultan comes back with actually his father's right hand man, and apparently his father and his brother were ambushed. So there was a nearby kingdom that there was called the Boyars that helped lead a revolt, and ended up betraying his father. And what the betrayal was is that the Boyars led a revolt against the Sultan. The whole point of keeping the boys is that you were, establishing peace. But the nearby kingdom of the Boyars convinced Vlad's cousin, Vlad II, to invade. So, the vow was broken. So the Sultan, didn't even have a chance to have revenge on that vow being broken, because the Boyars ended up killing his father, who was later released by the Sultan, I forgot to say, and his brother. His brother was buried alive, and his father was tortured. So, of course, our young Vlad is vowing revenge against the Boyars. Vlad's right-hand man bestows upon him the medallion, the cloaks, and the sword that his father originally was bestowing upon him. So swears Vlad Dracula he's going to avenge his family. So, and we get that really cool image of the dragon in the background. Just even with the traditional coloring, this still looks really cool, I think. So then we get the story moving forward. Starts moving at a pretty much faster pace at this point. A lot of stuff being because it's a lot of history being condensed. I did try to look up and match the history of this and that. Now, I don't know about some of the significant details, but the main steps of the account is pretty accurate, according to what I researched. So basically, Vlad decides to go on a rampage against the Boyars. He takes back his territory in Wallachia, and becomes, king of Wallachia in his father's place, and then eventually hunts down his cousin Vlad II for taking his name and for betraying his brother and his father, and his whole kingdom, really. And so this is our Vlad fighting his cousin Vlad II. Fun little, I like these little fighting scenarios that you would normally see in comics, and I like how they do it all on one page instead of a panel breakdown. It's kind of fun. That's a nice dynamic feel. Excuse me. So, of course, we get to see Vlad have revenge, and he does it by just sticking his sword straight through the mouth, and we get that dragon in the background again. So, and beheading this fellow of Vlad II. So, I'm not sure that this actually happened, that they actually fought one-on-one, and Vlad was able to get his revenge one-on-one like that. I do know that Vlad did invade the Warriors and invade, and Vlad II ended up dying in that excursion. But I don't know if he was solely responsible. Anyway, interesting little thing that next Easter Sunday that came, Vlad invited the Warriors, that like the nobles of the Warriors, to his court, posing that he's going to be establishing peace. And they're all celebrating and yay. And then, of course, Vlad brings in all these soldiers once everybody's comfortable, knocks a few people out, a couple of people killed, and they're all like, wait, what are you doing? We're all women and children, and there's old men here. And he's like, well, you know what? I'm going to resurrect the old castle in the south, and call it Castle Dracula. And it was an old ancient castle that he's going to resurrect as like the new stronghold, against the Turks. And so he's going to force all of these people to actually march to the castle and build it, for them. So instead of butchering them all, he's going to force them into labor for the next couple of years, even though they're all nobles and don't really have the ability to do that. So it's kind of his form of torturing them. And despite them begging mercy, he's like, screw it, I don't care. So they're getting ready to go. And here, really cool coloring job on some of this. Even though it's like a traditional coloring palette, there's a few cases where the lighting is just separated. The color separations are really cool. So before they leave, we get that first glimpse into his moniker of Vlad the Impaler. So he impales a few of the people that are going to weigh them down on their journey to the castle to build Castle Dracula. Like the elderly or the sick, the infirm people that are just going to prevent them from being able to, get there in time. So pretty wild, pretty cool. It was kind of a fun comic. I enjoyed it. I would like to get issues 2 and 3. Here we get a little bit of a glimpse into the Kirbyverse: Captain Glory, Bombast, Satan 6, and Nightglider. So I don't think I read any of these, but I read Satan 6, which was kind of fun. A lot of different inks by different people, including Steve Ditko and Frank Miller. So kind of an interesting shtick. And then so a little bit here about Esteban Maroto. So I won't get too much into it, but he's been around and done a lot of really cool things as well. He did a little bit on Cadillacs and Dinosaurs as well. He did a lot of Vampirella, and even worked on a Dracula magazine, like a comic magazine, back in the day. So he's well versed in the Dracula lore, most definitely. But love his artwork. Excellent cartoonist, to be sure. There's that Jurassic Park IP, and then an ad for Vlad the Impaler #2, and then here's the Bram Stoker's Dracula with that little bit of a glimpse of Mike Mignola artwork. Again, a beautiful book. If you can get your hands on that, whew, I think it's actually some of Mignola's best work, personally. I love all of his work. I'm not going to say that Hellboy or anything else sucks, but definitely I just think it fits. It's perfect. And I never played the Bram Stoker's Dracula game, but see, Dracula stuff was everywhere. Not just because this was a Dracula comic, but it was a big deal. So anyway, Dracula, Vlad the Impaler #1, Roy Thomas, Esteban Maroto, with some cool trading cards, and just a lot of fun. Esteban Maroto is quite the artist, and Roy Thomas is always brilliant. I almost had a chance to meet him at the last Comic-Con. He was there, and I would have liked to have actually taken this and a couple of the Elrics that I have, but to get signed, but I didn't want to wait in a line for 2 hours. Anyway, all right, everybody, stay safe, keep it psycho.